This is a tweet from Twitter about Dr. Oz, who actually, speaking of Valentine's Day, invited Jeffrey Epstein after he was a convicted pedophile, but before he was an indicted human trafficker, to a Valentine's Day party. Now, he's admitting that Americans need to get the measles vaccine because cases are spreading and we have our worst measles outbreak in 3 decades in this country. So now he's admitting, with his disgusting little face, that Americans need to get the measles vaccine. After, in September, going on Goebbels News and saying, I definitely would not have mandates for vaccinations. Oh, well, maybe you have no soul. And maybe you have no identity. And maybe you have no sense of right and wrong. And you just go with the flow. And whatever your daddy tells you to say, you just go out there and say with your stupid face. So 5 months ago, he said, I would definitely not have vaccine. 5 months ago, so-called Dr. Oz said, I would definitely not have mandates for vaccinations. Because he liked illness. But now, once we have our worst measles outbreak in 30 years, he calls on Americans to get the measles vaccine. Wow. So vaccines are like something you get retroactively? Do they work retroactively, or are they the type of thing you should get kind of in advance, proactively? It's really not that complicated. Like, a lot of people, they're corrupt or they're stupid. And there's a mixture of both. Usually it's corrupt people who are not that stupid, tricking stupid people who are not corrupt. And that's definitely the situation we get with anti-vax people. Like, most anti-vax people are not corrupt, evil people. They've just been fooled because, science can be a little complicated and people aren't super well educated. And then this argument people make of like, well, the government told us that vaccines would prevent all transmission and they don't. It's like, okay, let's just take that to be true, because I'm fully willing to admit that the government communicated very poorly about vaccines in 2020. So let's say we could go back and find Fauci and other people saying it actually does stop transmission. Because I remember thinking it would stop transmission potentially. Like, I think that might have been like communicated. So let's just say that was communicated. Okay, the government said it would stop transmission and it doesn't. Okay, so what? You know what I mean? You hear this from anti-vax people and it's like, okay, so what? So then you don't think it does anything? Like, you don't think because let's say they lied and it wasn't just like a misstatement. So the government lies and says this will stop all transmission. So that you think that's a good reason to never believe anything regarding vaccines efficacy. Like, you think because they do not prevent transmission. Now, I've looked into it, and my understanding is vaccines actually decrease the risk of transmission. So, by lowering the viral load, it decreases risk of transmission. I could be wrong about that. But even if vaccines didn't decrease risk of transmission at all, which again, my understanding is they do, they do. I don't even need to humor that. Like, you can look into it. They lower your viral load and make it less likely for you to transmit the virus. But regardless, I do think it's people's personal choice to not get the vaccine. And people, some people had to choose between their job and the vaccine. But conservatives should have no problem with that because they believe that's free will. And, if I get fired at my job because I try to unionize, like, conservatives would tell me, like, that was your choice. You could find another job. If I quit my job because my job pays me below minimum wage or a horrible wage, conservatives would say that's your choice. You chose to quit your job, and who cares that job will always just keep rehiring people at an exploitative wage. You get the freedom to choose where you want to work. But somehow that argument doesn't apply when they're talking about vaccines and when they're talking about people's free choice to not get vaccinated and quit, and therefore be fired or quit their job. Somehow that's now the job and the employer's responsibility to provide ideal situations for their employees and their feelings. Interesting how that works. So my point is, it's an individual choice. I do believe people absolutely should not be vaccinated by the government. People should absolutely have the right to say, no, I don't want to get a vaccine. Now, if it's your children, I actually think it's more complicated. I don't necessarily believe a parent should be able to make decisions that cause their children harm. It's a very tricky situation because obviously parents need to have authority over their children. And at the same time, should that authority allow them to make a decision that's likely to make the child injured? I actually don't think that's okay. I think that's child abuse. So I think it's more complicated when it's your child. But if it's you have the right to not get vaccinated. Absolutely. Absolutely believe that you can face the consequences of that. That's your choice. And that's a big difference than suggesting other people should not get vaccinated, which of course no one did. No one, not Joe Rogan, not RFK, not anyone, not any of these losers. None of them were suggesting you don't get vaccinated. How could you even think that? What? Because they talked about all the supposed dangers of it and myocarditis and so on, and never talked about how risks of myocarditis are worse if you get COVID than if you get the COVID vaccine by a lot? No, they were not suggesting you don't get vaccinated. How dare you jump to conclusions? What? Well, I never. You think they were suggesting to not get vaccinated? Why? Because they talked about all their issues with vaccinations and how they think there should be fewer vaccinations? You're going to jump to conclusions and say that they were telling people not to get vaccinated? How dare you? They were just opining in a world of hypotheticals. So yeah, I do think it's a big difference between making your own personal choice, saying, I'm afraid of getting stuck by a needle, I'm a little baby, versus going and telling other people in your personal or professional life or on a big platform to not get vaccinated. I think the latter is very unethical. You don't have the right, I don't think. I mean, morally, it's not okay for you to, I think legally you should have the right to go out and tell people not to get vaccinated. That's a little complex, but I do think you should legally have the right to tell people not to get vaccinated. And platforms should legally have the right to ban you from their platform for whatever they want, including that. That's just how it works. That's private industry. Again, something conservatives supposedly like. Companies being able to do what they want. Companies being able to have freedom. But when it's a company saying, get off our platform, we don't like you, for whatever reason, whether you're too gay for us or too much of an anti-vaxxer, platforms do all kinds of fucked up shit. But somehow conservatives start taking issue with a private industry's decision when it affects anti-vaxxers. So I do believe it should be legal to say, hey, don't get vaccinated. I also think it's immoral. I think it's immoral to tell people to do something that has a serious risk of hurting them. But Dr. Oz is just a complete loser with absolutely no qualms about hurting people. So he came out and went on Goebbels News and said, I would definitely not have mandates for vaccinations. 5 months later, he's like, oh, wait a second. So if they don't get vaccinated, then more children actually get hurt. So the measles is a thing that actually hurts children. Interesting. Okay, is that? Yeah. No, I remember that. Yeah. Right. Okay, right. I mean, it really does come down to stupidity and lack of almost object permanence, I honestly think. And it's people, or lack of perceiving reality, lack of understanding reality until it's jammed down their throat, until they have to watch us get the worst measles outbreak in 3 decades before they can say, oh, you know what? Yeah, no, there is a thing for that actually. Right. That's what the vaccine does. Right. Yeah, no, the vaccine helps with that. Yeah. Okay. So this was supposed to be a Twitter promotion segment, though. We are not going to be getting that Twitter contract renewed. I got to be honest. I did a good job talking about this, definitely, but it wasn't Twitter, and Twitter's not promoting Blue Sky. I mean, Twitter's not paying us to promote Blue Sky, I think. So they're not going to be happy about that. But otherwise, I think I really nailed that segment. This is a podcast.